The year was the spring of 1683, and before the morning mist had even lifted over Istanbul, the Ottoman Empire set out for one of the greatest campaigns in its history. At the head of the army was the Grand Vizier Mirzafon Lukara Mustafa Pasha, known as much for his ambition as for his splendor. A colossal army of approximately 150,000 men moved from Istanbul towards the banks of the Danube. This would be the Ottoman Empire's last great march into Europe. Janissaries, Sepahis, artillerymen, Timorat horsemen all set out with the same belief. If Vienna fell, Europe would kneel. But no one knew that this campaign would be a turning point in history, marking the beginning of the decline of the Ottoman Empire and the rise of European civilization. Meanwhile, where are you watching the video from? Write in the comments so we can see viewers from different countries. And if you want to continue delving into the dark pages of history together, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. The journey took months as the army crossed the Balkans, leaving behind cities and castles in ashes. Karam Mustafa Pasha believed victory was inevitable. Every village, every town was plunged into silence under the shadow of the crescent. But as they neared Vienna, Europe united and fear turned into anger. The European armies commanded by the King of Poland, John III Sobieski, had sworn to defend not just a city but the entire Christian world. All the soldiers of the Christian world united under a single banner for the sake of changing the course of history and achieving a glorious victory. In the summer of 1683, the Ottoman army advanced along the Danube and reached the outskirts of Vienna. Under the command of Grand Vizier Mirzafon Lukara Mustafa Pasha, a force of about 120 to 150,000 men had united under the banner of the Crescent. This army included 12,000 Janissaries, tens of thousands of Sepahis, artillery equipped with heavy cannons, Timorat cavalry, and arsenal troops. Additionally, support forces from provinces subordinate to the Ottomans were positioned around the army. Around 30,000 Tatar horsemen under the Crimean Khan Murad Gary. Auxiliary troops from the voivoders of Wallachia and Moravia and support forces from Transian Prince Michael I Apophis completed the flanks of this great army. On the Vienna front, the garrison commanded by Count Ernst Rudiger von Starrenberg defended the city with about 15,000 soldiers. However, the real strength was gathered outside the city. The Holy League army formed under the command of King John III Sobieski of Poland brought together forces from all corners of Europe with approximately 25,000 soldiers from Charles Duke of Lorraine, 12,000 from the Elector of Bavaria, Max Emanuel, 10,000 from the Elector of Saxony, Jan Georg III, and about 8,000 from the Franconian Swabian contingents. The total number reached about 75 to 80,000. While every nation carried its own banners, the symbol uniting them all was the Holy Cross. This army gathered not just to defend a city, but to protect the fate of a continent of European civilization from the shadow of the Islamic armies. Despite its numerical superiority, the Ottoman army faced many hidden disadvantages before Vienna. Primarily, the army was tired and disorganized after months of long marching. Supply lines stretched for thousands of kilometers and supply routes were disrupted. Karam Mustafa Pasha, wishing to turn victory into a diplomatic spectacle, opted for a protracted siege instead of a swift assault, a decision that slowly eroded the army's morale. The Crimean Tartars were ineffective in regular combat due to a lack of discipline. Furthermore, Murad Gary failed to carry out the order to attack the Polish forces. Rivalry and insubordination surfaced among the commanders in the army's center, and the Ottoman artillery did not achieve the expected impact against the heavy walls. In contrast, the European front presented the exact opposite picture. Vienna's defense was supported by engineering marvels like trenches and strengthened stone walls. The city's population, men and women, young and old, participated in the defense. Every house turned into a position. The most critical difference was in coordination and timing. The United European Army under Sois's leadership had both maneuver superiority and a moral advantage as they approached Vienna from the hills. For them, this war was not just a siege, but a struggle for the survival of civilization. Although the Ottoman army was still massive in terms of strength, the difference in strategy, motivation, and leadership was about to change all the balances. With the first light of dawn, the skies above Vienna were saturated with the smell of gunpowder. The famous Ottoman artillery began to fire to demolish the walls of Vienna. The artillery had a great share in every city the Ottomans conquered. But developing European engineering had increased the resistance of the castles and partially reduced the effect of Ottoman cannons compared to the past. With every shot, the walls were damaged but not demolished. European resistance was further hardened. Under the command of Khan Mustafa Pasha, thousands of Janissaries attacked in waves, but with every step they faced the cold breath of death. The city's trenches were filled with fallen soldiers. The mud mixed with gunpowder had turned into a swamp kneaded with blood. As the siege progressed, Vienna became a war of wills, not a pile of stones. As the days passed, the sky turned blood red. The Ottoman cannons did not fall silent. The city could not breathe. But behind the walls, the heart of Europe did not stop beating. The city's defense stiffened with each passing day. Women carried rubble. Children carried water and ammunition. Every street became a defense line. Every church a headquarters. The European armies defended their honor and their banners until their last breath. Khan Mustafa Pasha believed victory was imminent. He arrayed his army once more. He was certain the final charge would break the gates of Vienna, but a shadow loomed on the horizon. And this shadow would rise not only from the Crusader armies, but from within his own ranks. When the news of Sua's approaching army arrived, the Pasha stormed out of his tent in anger. Fate would be decided not at the gates of Vienna, but on the banks of the Danube. The order was clear. The Crimean Khan Murad Gur will deploy his horsemen and stop the army of the King of Poland. However, in Murad Gur's eyes, there was not obedience, but hatred. He had listened to Khan Mustafa's arrogant orders for months and nursed resentment over decisions made without consulting him. These two prides under the Ottoman banner could not share the same sky. Gur looked out at the vast plain before him in the morning mist. Sua's banners were slowly emerging. Thousands of Polish horsemen were descending from the hills like a storm. At that moment, the Khan's eyes darkened. He did not raise his sword. He fired no arrow. He spurred no cavalry. The Crimean army stopped. This was the harshest answer to Khan Mustafa Pasha's arrogance. And the course of history quietly changed. With the Crimean horsemen refusing to engage, no obstacle remained before Sobieski's army. The wind carried the Christian banners to the Ottoman lines. Khan Mustafa Pasha could no longer stop the storm coming from behind. The Tatar horsemen were watching the battlefield. The shadow of the crescent was slowly fading under the sun. At that moment, an empire had begun to kneel. Fate had passed its own judgment. Victory was lost not on the walls of Vienna, but in the silence of the Crimean Khan. And when the morning of September 12th arrived, the scales of fate tipped. The banners of the Crusader army appeared over the hills. The sound of hundreds of trumpets echoed along the walls of Vienna. So's horsemen descended upon the plain like a storm. The European armies struck the Ottoman flanks from both sides. Panic erupted in the encircled Islamic army. First the artillery, then the infantry broke ranks. The army established under the shadow of the crescent was instantly thrown into chaos. While the Janissaries fled left and right, the Tatar units also dissolved without a fight. The screams of the soldiers fleeing along the banks of the Danube mixed with the roar of the battlefield. This was an absolute victory for a united Europe under the Christian banner. For the Ottomans, it was the beginning of a long decline. From this date, the Ottoman power in Europe began to break slowly. The fuse for irreversible collapse had been lit. Towards evening, black smoke rose over Vienna. Ottoman tents were being looted and banners were falling one by one. Khan Mustafa Pasha watched his army melting away before his eyes, helpless. Vienna did not fall that day, but the Ottoman splendor remained there. Europe was reborn, the crescent retreated, and history recorded that day as the salvation of the West, the shaking of the East. Following the disaster at Vienna, the Ottoman army was now returning in silence along the roads it had once proudly marched. The ground carried the weight of defeat, not footsteps. The banners were tarnished and the soldiers' gazes were vacant. When Khan Mustafa Pasha reached Belgrade with a few thousand remaining soldiers, he was no longer just a commander but a symbol of a crumbling dream. When the news of the defeat reached Istanbul, Sultan Mehmed IV went mad with rage and he had no patience left for Khan Mustafa Pasha, to whom he had given the command of thousands of soldiers. A decree was written following this defeat that determined the fate of the empire. The man who once carried the might of the Ottomans to Europe would now face the wrath of that might. The order was clear. The state does not forgive a mistake. The thousands of soldiers who once knelt before him now hated him for the imprudence of his decisions. Inside his tent, the maps were still spread on the table, but those maps now bore the traces of defeat, not conquest. He looked at the hilt of the dagger gleaming before his eyes. The hands that once directed Europe were now trembling in the face of the cold breath of approaching death. It was as if fate was reading back to him the lines he had once written. Outside, the wind howled in the darkness. The executioners approached with silent steps. The Para looked up. He neither shouted nor pleaded. Only a cold smile appeared on his lips. His pride would not bow even to defeat. "I fought for the state," he said in a low voice. "But it seems the state's destiny will end with my neck." When the silken cord fell over his shoulder, time stood still. In the eyes of the soldiers, there was fear, respect, and regret. At that moment, it was not just one man who died. The dream of the Ottomans in Europe drowned with him. After the disaster at Vienna, Europe was never the same again. The city was saved, but much more had happened. The West had finally broken the chains of fear. So, victory was celebrated with victory bells across the continent. Churches in Rome held services for days. The Pope bestowed upon Suaz the title Savior of Christendom. This victory was not just a battle. It was the rebirth of the European spirit. The fear of the Ottomans was replaced by confidence, and European armies tasted the power of unity. On the Ottoman side, this defeat marked the beginning of a slow but unstoppable retreat. The pride broken at the gates of Vienna was the herald of a collapse that would echo in Nice, Belgrade, Navarino, and finally the Balkans in the following centuries. The shadow of the crescent shrank. The voice of the empire grew fainter, and history remembered that day as in Vienna more than just a city was saved. An age closed and another age was